Now, there are no plans for a fire alarm test. If you hear the alarm, please leave the building by the nearest exit. Please ensure your mobile phones are switched off or on silent. Restrooms are located on all floors, but please ask a member of staff for details should you require one. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and will eventually be loaded onto the Council's YouTube channel. Now, members of the public, members and officers, you are reminded that under the Openness of Local Government Bodies Regulations 2014, the press and the public may film, audio record, photograph, and use social media whilst the meeting is in progress for Part A items only. And as long as no disruption is caused to the meeting, um, also anyone filming is asked to focus their attention on elected members rather than other visitors. I would like to welcome and thank members of the public in the gallery and councillors for attending this public extraordinary council meeting today. The escalation in the Middle East is of significant concern to some members of our community, which is why this meeting was called at relatively short notice. Can I remind members of the public who are present that you must remain quiet whilst the elected councillors conduct their business here today. Members of the public are here to observe the meeting, and I therefore request that you conduct yourself accordingly. My job as chair of this meeting is to make sure the meeting is carried out in a dignified and proper manner. I do not want to have to adjourn the meeting and ask members of the public to leave. However, if disruption is caused, I will have no choice but to do so. Thank you in advance. Item number 2. Can I ask if there are any declaration of interest? Can members indicate if they have any disclosable pecuniary interest or personal and prejudicial interest in the item being discussed?
Mr. Mayor, I'm a member of the Conservative Friends of Israel, so I thought it might be as well to mention that.
Mr. Mayor, in terms of declarations, if the Friend is declaring membership of Conservative Friends of Israel, I'm a member of the Labour Friends of Palestine.
Yeah, it's okay. Item number 3 is a motion entitled An Immediate Ceasefire in Gaza. The motion was not available at the time the agenda was printed. However, I am accepting it as an urgent item due to the escalating situation in the Middle East. A copy of the motion was published and circulated last week. Councillor Brown, will you be moving the motion?
Mr. Mayor, yes, but before we do start, there is an amendment, an alteration, which is just tidying up some of the grammatical errors. So, raise that with us duly before. I hope that can be accepted, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Is that seconded? Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, the situation has escalated in the Middle East, and it's been grave concern to all of us. Obviously, we see how many communities have been affected here, because we have people here in the Jewish, Muslim communities, Palestinian communities who have friends and relatives affected by the escalation of violence. So what we're calling for today, Mr. Mayor, is that the city, through its local authority, Preston City Council, as it's named the growing number who are calling for an immediate ceasefire. We feel we want to do that, and we feel we want to add our name to the many across the country, across the world that are doing that. By doing that, what we do is we join the United Nations General Assembly. We join over 600 NGOs across the world. We join the Archbishop of Canterbury and Pope Francis. And much closer to home, recently, the Irish government and the French president have also called for a ceasefire. And at a domestic political level, we've seen the Welsh Assembly and also yesterday the Scottish Parliament call for an urgent ceasefire. The Mayor of Greater London, Sadiq Khan, Mayor of Greater Manchester, Andy Burnham, and West Yorkshire, Tracy Babrian. And then in Parliament, over 100 MPs have called for an urgent ceasefire, along with hundreds of councillors and the trade union movement doing similar. And a recent poll of the United Kingdom population said 76% of those polled also supported the ceasefire, and we feel we have a duty to represent their views in this chamber in the city of Preston. Obviously, the current escalation follows a horrific Hamas terror attack of the 7th of October 2023, which killed 1,400 people. This ruling Labour group has condemned that unreservedly, and a statement was read out by yourself, Mr. Mayor, where we remembered the victims of that attack at the last full council. As the United Nations General Secretary Antonio Guterres stated, despite the legitimate grievances of the Palestinian people, nothing can ever justify acts of terror, killing, maiming, and the abduction of civilians. And obviously, a big part of this motion is calling for the immediate release of hostages who are affected by that situation. Since then, even more innocent people, including many children, have been affected by the conflict. At the time of writing the motion, over 12,000 deaths have taken place in Gaza, and that equates nearly 5,000 children. There are even risks of the conflict escalating beyond the region. We have to remember that Palestine is a young country. We have a situation where 43% of the people within Palestine are children, and a bombardment at the scale that we're seeing by the government of Israel will see children die in unprecedented numbers. And if we just equate the amount of deaths that we've seen in the Gaza region to a country the size of the UK, it's equivalent to over 300,000 people losing their lives. So that's why we feel there's an urgency to add our name to all the names already that are calling for an urgent and immediate ceasefire. And my understanding, there has been some progress towards a pause within the conflict, and I do hope and pray, I'm sure every member here will hope and pray that becomes permanent. The charity Save the Children confirms the number killed in both Israel and Palestine in the first 3 weeks of the conflict surpasses the numbers killed in all conflicts since 2019. The United Nations General Secretary again confirms the bombardment by Israel does not constitute self-defense and that no party to an armed conflict can be above international law. We have a situation that within the region, there is immediate need for food, water, medicine, fuel, and essential supplies, with 2 million Gazans struggling to find drinking water. Operations are being conducted without anaesthetics, and the lives of premature babies are at risk. There cannot be a collective punishment inflicted on innocent civilians by any country. And whilst violence can never ever be justified under any circumstances, Mr. Mayor, we have to acknowledge the injustices the Palestinian people have faced for 75 years, and the need for a peaceful solution in the region that addresses those injustices and secures equality for everyone, including a viable Palestinian state. It was Albert Einstein who 70 years ago said, seeing the escalation of the arms race, we need a new way of thinking to deal with conflict. We should teach peace rather than war. What we do have within the international world community is many experts who've been involved in conflict resolution. I was brought up in the 1970s and 80s, born in the 70s, and obviously at the time there was a huge amount of conflict in Northern Ireland, and that conflict went back decades and even centuries. And obviously we had a peace process that was supported by the international community, which has now seen peace in Northern Ireland. It's a very different place. So we need that mindset going forward to try and achieve a resolution here and bring an end to the conflict, because innocent people are being caught up within it, within Israel and Palestine. So the motion today is very simple. it echoes that call for an immediate ceasefire and to support the international community in delivering conflict resolution. And in terms of specifics, it calls on Rishi Sunak and David Cameron to publicly call for an immediate ceasefire in the region by all parties and the unconditional release of all hostages, support the upholding of international law with appropriate investigation and accountability for breaches, again by all parties, support the unfettered humanitarian access to Gaza to alleviate the unacceptable levels of human suffering in the region, use a UK resettlement scheme to allow a route to safety for the most vulnerable in Gaza with emergency pathways for those seeking refuge from the conflict, and endorse a serious and concerted reinvigoration of international efforts for a two-state solution. So what we're doing is just writing to the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, and we're doing it with what we feel is a majority opinion position as we see support for a ceasefire grow politically in this country and beyond. And obviously, in terms of what we can do in Preston, we want to help in Preston, obviously. We acknowledge the deep hurt being felt across all our communities in the city, especially those who have people they know who are affected. So we want to work with our communities, including our Muslim and Jewish communities, to commemorate the loss of all lives in the region through a public commemoration or memorial in consultation with the Faith Covenant. And obviously, I do want to pay tribute to representatives on the Faith Covenant, because we've had both Muslim and Jewish representatives take part in multi-faith vigils, which I think is very courageous, and got to commend them for doing that, because we've got to make sure that tensions don't rise within our community. We want to build on existing efforts to raise awareness and challenge all forms of racism, including anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and anti-Palestinian racism. We also got to remember there's a further dynamic to this, that we're seeing the far right take advantage of this international conflict and take to the streets. We never want to go back to that again in this country. And obviously, we've got to do more to challenge racism. We've done a lot already in terms of show racism and the red card and the rest of it. And then work with the Preston City of Sanctuary to support any refugees fleeing the region and help them to adapt to life in our city. The Preston City of Sanctuary is a brilliant organisation that supported refugees from Syria and the Ukraine. We want that to help them to help anyone who comes to our city who's fleeing the region because of this conflict. I sincerely hope, Mr. Mayor, we can support this motion as a council and join the growing number of movements who want to see an end to this conflict and a solution based on peace and shared prosperity for everyone in the region. I move, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Matthew. Can you confirm the seconder of the motion, please?
I'm happy to second it, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to speak. Obviously, I'm supporting the motion, and I agree with everything the council leader has said. I do want to dispel a few myths, first of all, about what we're doing here today. When we put anything on social media about this, someone says just empty the bins. I promise you, we're still emptying the bins. Nothing has stopped because we're here this morning for an hour or whatever. The council business goes on unaffected. We also get a lot of, you're just local councillors. It won't do any good. What's the point? Well, as far as I can see, no one is stopping the destruction of Gaza. So what else can we do but speak up? Protest, go on marches, whatever people want to do, they need to do it. It's their right. It's a democratic right, and it's our democratic right. And we have people in this city who feel a deep connection to this issue, and with a duty to speak up. So that's what we're doing. We also get told that this is a very complicated situation and that we shouldn't take sides. Are we taking sides? I don't know. I take sides every day of my life. All the time I'm presented with information, and I observe things and I make judgments and I decide which way is best. Why wouldn't you take sides in a war if you're going to do that? We've decided today to speak up for the people of Gaza because Gaza is being destroyed. And effectively, the concept of Palestine as a state is effectively being destroyed as we speak. A humanitarian pause won't won't stop that. So that's why we're here today. And we think it's fully justified. I'm just going to say that I'm here for all my constituents who have contacted me, which has been dozens, email, by phone, face to face. I know that Mark Hendrick has had thousands of emails on this, and he's responded to every one. So we're all being contacted constantly, especially in the wards where there is a large Muslim population, of course, who feel a deep connection to this issue. And I'm not standing up here today because there are a lot of Muslims in my ward. I'm standing up here because I agree with them. Simple as that. And the destruction of Gaza must stop, and no one's stopping it. So that's why we're standing up today and saying these things. Thank you.
Yes, now we open for the discussion. If anybody wants to speak. Yeah, it will be a discussion on the motion, and then we will bring your amendment. Councillor Derby. Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I didn't think I'd be first, but anyway. This is an exceptional meeting. We did have one of these meetings quite a few years back. Anyway, the point is that we are a democratic organisation, and we're here to hear everybody's opinions, and that's one of the benefits of this system, that we're here to hear everybody. The first thing I'd like to say is that government policy is actually for not to have a ceasefire. So the Conservative government has said no ceasefire. So as Keir Starmer, he didn't want a ceasefire either. So the thing about this is that we've heard a lot of talk about prejudice, etc. And I'm trying to take the prejudice out of this, because it's just a conflict. It doesn't matter who's getting involved in it. It is a conflict. We don't want to see piles of dead bodies, especially of children. That is very upsetting. But there was an attack on Israel on the 7th of October, and it was a barbaric attack. I'm not going to go into the details that I've heard, because I just think they're just too barbaric to actually talk about. And I've also seen a lot of the destruction of Gaza by the Israeli Defence Force. And but there hasn't been a parity of reporting on the two incidents, I don't think. Would rather not be in this position. The Abrahamic Accord, if it had given a bit more time, we might have come up with a lot better situation, a more peaceful situation. But it's clear that Iran does not want, and is pulling the strings of Hamas, does not want a settlement in Palestine. It wants to eradicate totally Israel. And in fact, part of the constitution of the Iran National Guard is to eradicate Israel altogether. So as a friend of, as a conservative friend of Israel, as you could say, I might have a prejudicial point, but I'm trying not to go one side or the other. I mean, there are some instances on the West Bank where settlers have been moving in and pushing Christians and Muslims out. I don't think that's particularly right either. So, but the case with Gaza is that Hamas don't want peace. You have a ceasefire, what will it do? It'll just give them time to reorganize, to regroup. There's millions of pounds gone into Gaza, and the Prime Minister's said that when they sort this out, there's going to and get a permanent ceasefire, if we can have one, then they're going to put 30 million pounds from this country into Gaza to try and get it on some sort of economic footing. In 1948, the formation of Israel, people sort of thought it was somehow all the Jews were going to set up in a new country, but they've been there for thousands of years. They were there before the Christians and the Muslims. So, and back in 1914, there were Christians, Muslims, and Jews living quite happily together across the whole of the Middle East, what I suppose you could call the Ottoman Empire. So what's happened since then is a lot of Jews have ended up in Israel because there isn't room for them anywhere else, apparently. So it is a complicated history, and it's unfortunately resulted in what is a bloodbath at the moment. Going forward, how can we get peace? Is to annihilate Hamas. Hamas is causing a problem. It's like a thorn in your side. If you don't take it out, it'll go septic. And Hamas is that thorn in our side. I'm not saying that Israel are beyond criticism, but Hamas has got to be taken out altogether. The Abrahamic Accord was actually getting results. Arab countries were talking about normalizing some sort of relations with Israel. When I was in the Middle East, you could go in a bookshop and you could buy an atlas, and you couldn't find Israel on the map. So things have moved on since then. Israel has a right to defend itself, and some people are saying, well, this is more than defense. They have to go in deep and actually cut out Hamas. Hamas is hidden behind the civilian population. It's been based in hospitals. There's a whole system of tunnels. It is a really big operation and a very difficult operation.
Councillor Thompson, sorry to distract you. You've gone past 1 minute.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. Right. I'll finish it up. So I can't vote for the ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire, because I don't think by calling an immediate ceasefire, it will solve the problem. It's not government policy. It's not the policy of Keir Starmer, but I am sympathetic to the innocent victims of this thing on both sides. Interestingly enough, when I looked at the Liberal notice of motion, they put something about discrimination, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, but they'd also left off prejudice against Christians, which goes on in the Middle East and in Israel, I have to say as well. I'm not particularly happy about that, but there we are. So I can't support the motion. As far as I'm concerned, it's my government's policy not to have the ceasefire. It's a real shame about all of the innocent victims, but we are where we are. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Boswell.
The Mayor, I didn't expect to come in too early. I've got a cough. If even a fraction of the media reports are true, then the massacre of October 7th was an act of savagery. It was a war crime. People responsible are war criminals and need to be pursued to the ends of the earth by the international community. You can't sugarcoat it. It was an international crime. But history is a film, not a picture. You have to place events like October the 7th in some sort of historical context. And we have had many other acts of savagery in the Middle East since the 1940s. We had the Sabir Shatila massacre in Beirut in 1982 at a Palestinian refugee camp, when 3,500 Palestinian civilians, defenseless, were massacred following an Israeli invasion of Lebanon. The action of the IDF was condemned by even many in Israel. And this itself was a tick for tack massacre for other massacres that have taken place by all parties. Some of us might remember the taking and killing of Israeli athletes at the Munich Olympics in 1972. Munich, of all cities in this world to carry out an attack on the Jewish state. Don't think many of us will remember the bombing of the King David Hotel by a militant right-wing Zionist organisation in 1946, which resulted in the deaths of many Christians, Muslims and Jews. Or the Sergeant's Affair, when some Zionist organisations executed 2 British Army NCOs and the bodies were subsequently booby-trapped, so when they were cut down by the British forces, they exploded and caused further damage. The point I'm making, you can't put one atrocity in isolation and talk about that one atrocity. It's a whole film of atrocities. Even in this country where we had 30 years of violence in Northern Ireland, we in Britain are completely baffled by the nature and continuing acts of violence in the Middle East. We can't understand it, even after what we saw and witnessed for so many years in Ireland. But how do we move forward? This is the 3rd time we as a council have discussed this, every time as a result of invasion by Israel into Gaza. In 2009, we passed an emergency resolution. Salim made his debut speech and used the ripples in the pond analogy by Bobby Kennedy to say that if enough people throw enough small pebbles in a pond, you create a tidal wave. So that's the argument against it's pointless, we have no powers, we have no influence. If enough people do something that's right, you will beget that right prevail. We also discussed it in 2014 when we threw the Palestinian flag. The point is that the Palestinians are homeless and dispossessed. Israel wants greater control of the area on its boundaries. That's just a geopolitical reality of the situation. It's not unique to the Middle East, but it seems most evident in the Middle East. You can't talk about this situation without recognizing the basic causes of the problem. We all want a ceasefire. One will occur eventually. It's better to occur sooner rather than later because lives will be saved. But nothing will change, and we'll continue to discuss, and we'll continue to have massacres and further acts of savagery until a sustainable, permanent, independent, and culturally significant homeland is found for the people of Gaza.
Thank you, Councillor Boswell. Councillor Akhtar. Councillor Akhtar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good morning. I've had many conversations recently about the Middle East conflict. And I found myself saying and hearing others say it is complicated, or I don't understand it, or it's so far away it doesn't affect us. But it is not complicated. We must stand against injustice, inequality, and any kind of racism wherever and whenever we see or hear them. Calling out the death of innocent civilians in Israel and Palestine is not complicated. Calling out the siege of Gaza and the collective punishment there is not complicated. Calling out anti-Semitism is not complicated. Calling out anti-Palestinian racism is not complicated. I say no to anti-Semitism and no to anti-Palestinian racism. Let that be the mantra for everyone. Today is 46 days of horror for the people of Palestine who have been collectively imprisoned, punished, injured, and killed. It is heartbreaking to see the devastation in Palestine, in Gaza, and the West Bank. Homes have been reduced to rubble, and families have lost everything. Thousands of innocent civilians have died under the rubble of their homes, and hundreds of people are still trapped under the rubble, waiting to be rescued or die from suffocation, starvation, or thirst. 94 government buildings, 253 schools, 71 mosques, and 3 churches have been destroyed in Gaza since October the 7th. Food, water, medicine, fuel, electricity has been withdrawn by the Israeli government. Babies and children are dying due to no oxygen or medical aid being made available. There is a humanitarian catastrophe and a stain on humanity, and we must support a ceasefire to deal with this. A ceasefire will help protect civilians, promote humanitarian aid corridors, and to ensure international law is upheld. Palestinians are not collateral damage. They are human beings, just like my family and your families. By voting for this resolution, we can speak up for justice. We can speak up for humanity. We can stand against racism. We can show our communities we are listening, we have heard them, that we care. Members, I implore you all, this motion transcends party politics. This is for humanity, this is for justice. Please vote favourably for this motion to call for a ceasefire. History and our constituents will judge us on what we do today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Afzal. Councillor Akhtar.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to touch on three things really today in this motion today. One is really around what's going on at the moment. Second, it's around why this matters to us here in the city of Preston. And thirdly, is around what we can do next and where we go from here. And the first thing I want to say is, the colleague touched upon complications. And I lived and worked in Gaza. I worked for the UNRWA, it works relief agency. I saw firsthand what happened to the Gazan people, how they were treated. I was there before the Second Intifada, before 2000. And I'm very clear the situation is significantly worse now than it was back then. The oppression that those Palestinian people were experiencing is something that I bore witness to firsthand. We have a lot of people sitting in the room talking about how complicated it is. It really isn't complicated. On the one hand, we have a country which has one of the largest armies in the world, the most best funded, best organised, best resourced armies in the world. We have one side with millions and billions, in fact, of US military aid given to it every single year to uphold its strategic position in the Middle East in order to support its global geo-alliances. We have one country in the Middle East in this conflict that has the Iron Dome, which protects it, rightly so, from the bombs and missiles being directed at it by Hamas. And those are wrong and contemptible acts of terror by the Hamas population and Hamas militants. But we also have on the Israeli side bunkers for those civilians and the ability for those civilians to leave their country or their city and their towns and move away from the violence. On the other side, we have a country, a state, in name, Palestine, Gaza, which has no army, no navy, no air force, no means of civil defense of its populations. There's a population on this side of the conflict which has no bunkers, no Iron Dome, no protection, no safe place to go to the Gaza Strip, being forced out of northern Gaza into the middle and then being forced out of the middle into the south. Now, I point out to you that there's a very clear strategic plan going on here, which is to continue the displacement, the dispossession and the destruction of the people of Palestine and Gaza. The Israeli government has been very, very clear. We know that there are far-right elements within the Israeli government who've been very clear about what their plans are. Their description of the dehumanizing language of calling Palestinians animals who should be destroyed. This is the language of extremism. And it's not a surprise. You've got members in that Israeli government who are talking about their fascism, who talk about the fact they are proudly homophobic and fascist and extremist. This is unacceptable. So we're not talking about equals. We're going to condemn Hamas, and rightly so. What they did on the 7th of October was heinous. It broke every piece of international law. From an Islamic point of view, and I am a Muslim, it broke every condition of law of warfare in my own faith. I condemn that. But I also condemn what the Israelis have done in response. We talk about, I've never in my lifetime been in a situation where I see every single UN agency calling out, demanding a ceasefire, including the Secretary General of the UN. It doesn't happen on one side. And then you've got forces like the United States and the United Kingdom and the EU, shamefully, on the other, saying, actually, you know what, we're going to carry on with a bit of bombing because those Palestinian lives don't really count. They don't really matter. And that's fundamentally what's going on here. I mourn the loss of every Israeli and I mourn the loss of every Palestinian. But I can't bear the fact that every morning and every night I have to check on journalists that I'm following, UN workers that I'm following. I'm counting. I work in the NHS in the UK. Our system is built on migrants from other parts of the world, including Palestinian migrants, including in this city of Preston. What I can't bear to see is that we are having to monitor day and night which of our friends or people that we follow, that we care about, have been murdered and which have not. We're desperately waiting for their texts or their messages to show up on Instagram or on Twitter so we can see that they are still alive. That's a horrific situation to be in. Coming back to the residents in the city, why does this matter to us in Preston? It matters because we have Palestinians in our communities. We have Christian Palestinians and we have Muslim Palestinians, people who have fled, who became refugees in 1948 when the Nakba happened, when the first big displacement happened, and people who are still fleeing Palestine because the disgraceful way in which they're treated as second-class citizens. You rightly touched on the fact that, people are able to go to Israel. Jewish people went to Israel. They chose to do the Aliyah, go back to Israel, because the Israeli government was offering them, inviting them home, inviting them to Israel, saying, come here, we'll give you the housing, we'll give you the transport, we'll give you everything you need to set up your lives. But it didn't just stop in Israel mainland. It continued into the occupied territories, in Palestinian territories. The settlers who've been moving in are literally forcing out hundreds and hundreds of Palestinians from their homes that have been there for centuries. And that's the real tragedy here. Those people end up becoming migrants and refugees. They end up in places like Preston and other parts of the world. They thrive, of course, in other parts of the world because they're really committed. And what's really pernicious for me is that it's no longer just about killing civilians. The Israeli army is literally targeting doctors, nurses, journalists. It's even targeted, we say that, oh, the Palestinians don't want peace, they don't want to have a peaceful challenge. They are literally targeting the guy who organized the Great Return March some years ago, which was a peaceful protest against Israeli occupation, was targeted and murdered by the Israeli armies recently. So it matters to our communities. We are hurting. We are hurting, and I'm tired of being told, "Oh, hurting." Others are hurting too. Yes, they are, and rightly so. We should recognise that. But I will not have my community's views and concerns downtrodden and put in second class, because we've got to treat everyone equally. No, sorry.
Councillor Akhtar, sorry, you got 20 seconds left.
20 seconds. That's enough for me to conclude. What we need. Someone described. You described. The pebbles piece in the pond, building that up. There has been a tsunami of violence in the last 7 weeks. Israel has flattened 50% of Gaza Strip. 50%. No homes for refugees to go back to. They've done that because they understand they want to destroy that piece of land and reclaim it. And they openly talk about reclaiming the land. That tsunami of violence can be stopped by a tsunami of solidarity. Now, I can't persuade my leader of my party. I can't persuade your prime minister, the leader of your party. But when we come together, and we are coming together, we are forcing governments to step up and do the right thing. And that's fantastic because we've been able to see today the release of hostages, or the deal to release hostages. That is the peaceful solution. This will have to be a peaceful resolution. You cannot violently bomb people into submission. It cannot happen. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Indulge you.
Thank you. Councillor Reedham, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll keep this very brief, to be honest with you. On a personal level, I'm genuinely conflicted by this. I think what we've seen in Gaza in the last few weeks is appalling. There's lots to agree with what the councillor has just said there, and I think Councillor Rawlinson's words were very wise, to be honest with you. However, it's my government's policy that we don't call for a ceasefire, although I'm thankful personally that we look like we're getting somewhere this morning, the release of some of the hostages. What happened on the 7th of October was despicable, and that's what kicked this off now, accepting that it's been going on for an awful long time. Israel has a right to defend themselves, it's quite clear. Whether or not it is now going far too far is a question for an International Court of Justice. But I find it strange that the Labour Group have not asked Keir Starmer to support this motion. I find that very odd because he has come out and said that he's not going for a ceasefire. So I suspect the Labour Group are conflicted as well. All I want to say is that I'm struggling personally with what's going on, and how I vote is between me and my maker. But I would have loved to have seen that notice of motion say Keir Starmer as well, because then it would have had an awful lot more credibility from my perspective.
Thank you, Councillor Reedham. Councillor Nathan. Nathan, yeah.
Rest. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I just want to say that I'll be supporting the motion being put by the Labour group today for an immediate ceasefire. I just want to, people have talked about the current situation. I want to take you back, way back, and people who know me, they know I talk about history a little bit. Ever since human beings have been on this planet, they've been killing one another and committing atrocious acts of violence, some of them unimaginable, throughout history. In the early days, I can imagine little tribes going and coming across other tribes and just decimating them totally for whatever water or pieces of agriculture or anything that they wanted. And that must have gone on for years and years. And then somebody must have sort of come to a conclusion that, we need to be a little bit better than this as civilizations get a bit bigger. So they come across developing some rules for warfare, which in a sense almost sounds like a contradiction in terms that, you want to just go in and decimate and kill everybody in front of you, then the objective's achieved. But people have sat down peacefully in peaceful times and come up with some rules about what kind of weapons you shouldn't use, what kind of sort of people or properties that you shouldn't destroy. And it's to try and get some sense. And even people who are captured within warfare, there's rules for how you should try and treat them. So it's a case of moving towards a more civilized humanity, in a sense. And despite the rules over the centuries, people have broken these rules when they engage in warfare. And each side in the disputes will sort of say, well, we did it because they did this and we did that and they said this and they were at fault. And we get all these sort of excuses all the time. But we sit today and stand occasionally in this sort of meeting room, and we're facing one another and we're having a discussion. And I just want to talk about maybe two situations where Preston was involved in conflict. And it's going back some while, but 1648, the Civil War, and 1715, the Battle of Preston, a few miles down the road, and some of it was just a few yards down the road, where if we'd have been transported then, we wouldn't be sitting here looking at one another and, reading papers and sort of pushing pens, but we'd have had weapons in our hands and we would have been facing each other eye to eye and probably charging at one another and fighting. So thankfully, we've sort of moved on from that situation. And just one in terms of what kinds of things went on. In the 1715 Battle of Preston, one of the generals or leaders from one of the defeated armies, if you do your history, I'm not a historian, the punishment for that person was that they were hung, drawn, and quartered. So for those of you who know what hung, drawn, and quartered means, it's one of the barbaric actions that you can do. Not that you just kill somebody by hanging them, but then you're sort of drawing them and then you're even cutting up into pieces. So this is this country in the Civil War, what they do to the people who lose. So hopefully and thankfully we've moved on and here we are sitting together. It's not to say that it's not going to ever happen again, even in a sort of a civilized environment that we're in. But we have to look forward and keep that momentum of discussions and peaceful resolutions. Because if you go right back, the human innate instinct is survival. And in that mode, we can do all sorts of actions against other human beings. So, Mr. Mayor, to conclude, I'm calling for, along with the Labour group and hopefully everybody else, an immediate ceasefire so that we can have some of this humane solutions that we talk about and we've moved forward on. And I hope that in my lifetime, the current conflict doesn't keep getting sort of trying to get resolved in a violent means, but hopefully in a more peaceful way in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Psios. Councillor Copeland.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think a lot of what I wanted to say has already been echoed by my colleagues and totally support the motion. I think for me, representing a ward, indeed, you know, my constituents, high percentage of the Muslim community, I'm listening to them, and I think the appreciation of that grief and that, you know, them having a voice and not being able to voice that to their elected councillor to take forward is really important. And then as a grieving community across all the wards, and all my constituents from all faiths have felt, you know, really let down. The fact in the beginning, immediate when this started, that it wasn't a called out for a ceasefire. And that has continued all along till today, as we have been pushing as a Labour group for that ceasefire. Communities haven't been listened to. And when you are an elected councillor, they're looking for somebody to lead. They're looking for somebody to take that direction. They're looking for somebody to take that forward. And I think I've heard the deputy leader say that, you know, we are constantly being, you know, what are you doing to support us? What can you do to take this forward? You, as grassroots communities, it felt like that they had well, they don't have any support. You know, they have families there, fellow Muslim, fellow brothers and sisters. And I just think that, yeah, I've heard colleagues, and we're going back in history and going forward in terms of what is happening politically. But when it comes down to a human level, I think the appreciation of our as humans, how we feel, whatever we see, you know, we want to react to it. We want to be supportive to it. We want something that we can do to it to support that. You know, watching when my constituents are saying to me that, and especially my Muslim constituents, that they're watching their brothers and sisters in, what's the right terminology I can use? Being slaughtered, being killed, they've got no food, no water, no electricity. And then we're criticised that we can't go on a march, we can't do this, we can't do that. It's just unacceptable. And I think today, I really want to say to my constituents that we are totally supporting the Labour motion because it's the right thing to do. And they've got a voice. And if they're going to elect me as a councillor, then I should be able to represent them in the right way. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Copeland. Councillor Warner, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We need to stop the killing now. There's been far too much of it. Children are children. Their ethnicity, nationality, religion are irrelevant. Children are children. We need to listen to the wise words from the past, from someone like Rabbi Hillel the Elder. And I quote, "That which is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbour." And I believe everyone can learn from this, both here and abroad and on all sides. A ceasefire from both sides is now imperative. The leaders in our country need to demonstrate some leadership. Doing the right thing is not hard, and history will judge them. And history will not be kind. Ask Tony Blair. What will Sunak's and Starmer's legacy be? In Sunak's case, not much. He's running out of time. But Sir Keir Starmer still has plenty of time to do the right thing. The ongoing war in Israel-Gaza has also brought other issues to the fore, which I feel quite passionately about, and that's freedom of speech. It's supposed to be the lifeblood of democracy, a sacred cow. But good God, the things you can say, the things you can't say, the things you can do, and the things you can't do. For me, it's a bit 1984. Numbers. What are numbers? You've got 1,400 killed on one side. You've got 14,000 and more on the other side. Interesting, these numbers, aren't they? Do they make you pause and reflect? Or are they just numbers and statistics. I fully support the motion in front of us, and I hope all my colleagues on all sides here do the right thing. Doing the right thing isn't hard. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Sauer, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm Councillor Sarwar from the St Matthew's ward. First of all, I'd like to commend my fellow councillors for expressing their concerns. I also too echo their sentiments, so thank you. Mr Mayor, as local councillors, some may say we may have limited influence on foreign policy, but as human beings, we must advocate for compassion and the right thing. It is important that we think globally and act locally, whether it be the environment, human rights, or racism in all its forms. That's including anti-Semitism, anti-Arab racism, or anti-Palestinian racism, Islamophobia, prejudice against Christians, and so on. Today, I'm here to represent the concerns of my constituents and to stand in support of this motion to address the urgent humanitarian crisis in Palestine. Mr. Mayor, the people of Palestine are not collateral damage. They are human beings. We cannot remain silent in the face of their suffering. We must push our leaders and the government to call for a ceasefire now. I also want to add that we must be careful not to let hate use religion to divide us. When someone like the ex-Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, slanders millions of people for marching, it brings shame to UK politics. Her attempts lead to polarise the debate and create a rift between Muslims and non-Muslims is not only spiteful, but also dangerous. It's also important to know that Palestinians come from different faiths: Muslims, Christians, Baha'i, and others. They face a specific kind of racism, and that's called anti-Palestinian racism, which has been going on for over 75 years. This motion today is historic because it's probably the first time we've used anti-Palestinian racism in this council chamber or anywhere in the UK. But before I finish, I just want to say we need to deal with racism and hate on both sides in order to move towards peace and justice. This motion recognises anti-Palestinian racism, and we all need to do more to understand and act against it, just like we do for Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and prejudice against Christians. I too also support this motion. Silence is complicity, and history will judge us for our actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sauer. Councillor Khan.
Mayor. Thank you. I would firstly like to share with you that on a personal level, like many others in this chamber today, my colleagues, this has been a very distressful, emotional and challenging time for us, especially myself as the community lead in Preston for this council. I would just like to add and echo the sentiments, the comments and the reasons from my colleagues, as you have just heard, on the importance of this motion in asking for an immediate ceasefire, which I wholly support and agree with. I believe that this is necessary, given the disproportionate number of innocent civilians, in particular children in Gaza, who have already lost their lives. It is the right thing to do, and almost very much wanted by many in the community, to see an end to this violence and the release of all hostages. Every year over the past 5 years, I've stood in this chamber as the community lead and said the words, never again, never again, when remembering innocent lives that have been lost during past conflicts that could and should have been avoided. This is why I feel the ceasefire is of utmost importance now, and it deeply saddens me that we have not learned from the lessons from the past. But to avoid further catastrophe, we must act now and do what we can to save lives. That is what this motion is all about. The deepening crisis in Israel and Palestine has cost thousands of lives and is exacerbating an already desperate Palestinian refugee crisis in the region. The Refugee Council has put forward a number of proposals set out in a briefing paper to be introduced quickly and build on approaches taken by the government to other conflicts of significant scales as those in Afghanistan and Ukraine. Some of these proposals, which have been endorsed by Preston City of Sanctuary, include medical evacuation of people in need of significant specialist care, an emerging family reunion scheme modelled on the approach introduced as the wake of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and emergency refugee protection visas, prioritise cases of Israelis and Palestinians in the UK asylum system. We will continue to work alongside all communities, whatever faith group they belong to, or racial group, as mentioned in this motion, and particularly the Jewish and Palestinian minority communities in Preston, who are understandably in deep grief for the loss of family and friends, as they have a deep connection to their states. I will continue to engage, listen, and endeavour to bring our communities together through community cohesion, tackling hate crime, in particular Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and protecting all forms of hate crime, which has no place in Preston. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Khan. Councillor Desai.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm supporting the motion this morning. I'd like to keep this simple. Too many innocent lives have been lost. How many more lives must be lost before a ceasefire occurs? We need it sooner rather than later. They've shown that it can be done with this current pause. They can agree a ceasefire. They've done it for the next few days. Let's hope this will lead to a more permanent ceasefire and more permanent solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Desai. Councillor Rice, did you want to comment? Did you say? Yeah. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with the comments that have been made on this side, and I rise to support the motion. I want to concentrate on the impact on women and children and newborn babies in Gaza. 70% of the people who have died in Gaza are women, children and newborn babies. Disproportionate amount that have been killed. 14,000 people have been killed so far. About half of the population in Gaza are under 18. Innocents, as far as I'm concerned. The fact is that no child is safe in Gaza. I want to relate it in a sense to Preston. Can you imagine if the Royal Preston Hospital was under siege and under bombardment, and you were actually pregnant and you went into premature labour and you went to the hospital and there was no incubators with electricity, there was no food for the mothers, there was no warmth? We would be absolutely horrified. And that is the situation that women are facing in Gaza. Every day, 180 women give birth. And of those, 20 of the babies will need specialist care. That care is no longer available. What have those newborn babies done to deserve this? We've actually seen that they've bombed schools. I think about the school, one of the schools in my ward, Frenchwood, where my children went. Can you imagine if Frenchwood School got bombed, how we would feel? And yet they have bombed schools in Gaza, indiscriminately killing children. The UN Secretary General has described the lives of children in Gaza as hell on earth. Not only are children being killed, children are missing under the rubble. Thousands of children are missing and being pulled out, possibly with without limbs. There's absolutely horrendous stories, and they're not stories. These are about real children who are suffering unbelievably bad. The fact is, in Gaza, 1.7 million people have been displaced. 930,000 people are living in overcrowded United Nations premises, and they're being bombed. If I just refer back to the Al Shifa hospital, the fact that that has been being destroyed and is basically not functioning is very much against international law. We heard about the law and stuff from my colleague, Councillor Natha. How can we accept the bombing of hospitals? Just to give a story of one child, barefoot and weeping, coloured Day 9, hurried towards dozens of bodies wrapped in white burial shrouds, blankets and rugs outside the overcrowded morgue. Where's my mum? He cried next to a photographer for the New York Times. I want to see my mum. Where is Khalil? He continued, barely audible between sobs as he asked for his 12-year-old brother. A morgue worker opened a white shroud so Khalid could kiss his brother one final time. He bid farewell to his 8-month-old sister. The family had waited years for this little girl to be born. This is the little girl who is no longer here. What has she done to deserve this? The fact is, not only are we seeing the people killed because of the lack of basic human rights, the lack of water, the lack of food, we're actually seeing disease rife in Gaza, diarrhea, thousands of babies, children under 5 are now suffering from diarrhea and may well end up dying, not because of a bomb, but because of a disease that shouldn't be allowed to continue. So I say we have to actually show where we stand on this issue. There are mothers who actually, as a mother, I very much feel that we shouldn't be allowing this to happen to children who are shouting, please protect me, please, please hide me, I don't want to die. How can we stay silent in such a situation when this is happening to people abroad? No mother should give birth while a battle rages in the neighbourhood outside a hospital. No mother should have her premature newborn taken off life support because the fuel in the hospital has run out. No mother should endure the guilt of her child crying from under the rubble, crying, "Mama, get me out. Where are you?" No mother should have to pull their dead child's body from the rubble of the family home because a 2-ton bomb has dropped on it while she was out shopping. And I could go on and on about the horror stories that are taking place in Gaza. So I plead to everybody here, we should be supporting this resolution. We have to be demanding our government supports a ceasefire. We have to see a humanitarian resolution to this situation. Obviously, I decry what Hamas did in Israel, and I'm not at all supportive of that. But the fact is that, as is being said, there's been issues going on before Hamas was even ruling Palestine.
Excuse
This
me,
has been
Councillor
going on for
Wise,
years and years
your
and years.
time is up.
Please support a ceasefire. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Wise. Is any more, anybody else wants to speak? Councillor Brooks?
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't intending to speak, but I think there's one thing that hasn't been addressed. I think it's really important. There's obviously a lot of horror going on, but then I think, what is the real motive? this has started making me think, and I did some research, why are people being exterminated? That's what's happening. Why is the clearance of Gaza and the West Bank? Why? Because if they got nothing, what is the importance? So this is when I did start like doing a bit of investigation. And then the reason why is because Gaza and the West Bank are oil rich and gas worth billions and billions of pounds. Now, this is well known, and the United Nations on Trade and Development identified existing Palestinian oil and natural gas reserves on the West Bank of Gaza, and that this could be developed for millions and billions of pounds that would be for the benefit of Palestine people. Now, this is what I'm suggesting is the real motive. And this is the reason I've gone further in saying not only do we need a ceasefire, we need to call for the resignation of Rishi Sunak. He will never, ever ask for a ceasefire because his family are directly benefiting from the conflict in Gaza. And you might think, all right then, what is this? And I'll tell you how this works. There have been licenses being given out in late October that are 12 licenses. BP is one of the people, one of the companies who's directly going to benefit from one of these licenses. Rishi Sunak's family members, his in-laws, have this Indian company that's called Infosys. It's an IT company, and they recently did a $1.5 billion deal with BP in May. So he's not in his family's interest or economic interest to call for a ceasefire. So wondering why there is government in this country will never support this ceasefire when they're going to directly financially benefit. Now, I've done quite a bit of research on this, and I don't have to go into lots of facts and figures, but this is why he's conflicted and won't ask for a ceasefire. So follow the motive, what's really going on. And on top of what you've heard, Councillor Wise, the cost of this oil and this gas is all these children and innocent victims. So put the history on that. A lot of this, I think, is diversion for what is really going on. That's what needs to be called out. Who's got the power? Who's making the money? Every day that a child dies, every day that a mother pulls out a baby that is injured, every day that the hospitals are done, there is a deflection of this, what is going on that. But the real scene is, where is the money? Who is benefiting? Who every day is benefiting from money being made? And I'm telling you now, Rishi Sunak's family, his wife is earning pound by pound in this, and that is what's happening. So I honestly believe that without people fully understanding what's going out, there will not be a ceasefire, and these are the reasons why. So that's my research. I'm giving you unbiased. I'm certainly saying need to support this motion. We need to have the ceasefire, but people need to see what's happening. Follow the money, and that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Now there has been an amendment submitted by Councillor Darby, and it was published yesterday with a hard copy being placed on your seats today. Councillor Darby, would you like to move your amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In introducing the amendment, the first thing I want to say is to echo the words of many that we've already heard today, and the first paragraph of the motion itself. For all that we know that the region of Palestine and Israel have been the source of bloodshed and horror for well over 2,000 years, the events of the 7th of October and what has happened since have proven that it still holds the capacity to shock and disturb us in equal measure. Regardless of where each of us stand on today's discussion, I'm certain the hearts of every one of us here go out to those who are caught up in the ongoing suffering in and around Gaza. And so too do our thoughts go to those around our city who have friends, family, loved ones who have been engulfed by this conflict equally, regardless of race, religion, or politics. I brought this amendment to the original motion in the spirit of collaboration, in the hopes that we can come together and unite around a joint statement on behalf of our city, condemning the violence being meted out and calling for a bilateral ceasefire. A ceasefire that will see all the hostages taken by Hamas return to their families, and a ceasefire that will stop the punishment landing on innocent civilians in Gaza. I well understand the heavy emotion that lies on this issue for so many people in Preston as around the world. I understand the instinct to seek sides under such emotion, especially when it is your own community, which is bearing the brunt of boundless barbarity. But we are not ourselves in the heart of the forge, though we feel its heat in our face and feel the force of the blows passing through us. So we owe it to those who are caught between the hammer and anvil of war to harness these emotions, to find common ground and to work together to find a lasting peace. This is the thrust of the motion before us, the desire to find a lasting peace. The lasting peace that will give both Palestinians and Israelis alike the dignity and security which they need and deserve. To do this, we need a sustained political and diplomatic solution. The only route to this is a bilateral ceasefire. But let us be clear about this. It must be a truly bilateral ceasefire. A simple freeze of the conflict simply will not suffice. That does not provide the long-term security that is needed. It doesn't help to secure the future. And most importantly, it leaves in jeopardy the lives of too many innocent people on both sides who have already suffered enough and more than enough. Every death of an innocent human being, every single one, Palestinian or Israeli, pushes peace further away now and risks radicalizing ever more future combatants, making it ever harder to achieve that lasting peace. And so our call, joining a growing chorus, is for a bilateral ceasefire, not as an end in its own right. A ceasefire is by its nature temporary, but as a necessary pause to the trauma, to the bloodshed, to the deaths, to the ever-growing tragedy of this conflict. This is a necessary first step towards peace, and a step which is contingent upon both sides to hold. We cannot be naive about the enormity of what we are asking for, and we must welcome any and all steps that move in this direction, no matter how small. But we must continue to call for peace. We must demand our government, along with the rest of the international community, to work together to end this conflict, and not just to return to a status quo antebellum, but instead the opposite. To lead an international push to ensure that things do not return to how they were before the 7th of October. Let the legacy of this horror be the rebirth of a meaningful peace process and the renaissance of a true two-state solution. And so now, here today, I hope that we will all come together, Preston, united as one, regardless of race, religion, and politics, united in our horror at the violence on all sides of this conflict, united in our calls for peace, and united in our determination to protect our own community, those in Preston who now feel especially vulnerable and under threat in the face of tensions imported from nearly 4,000 kilometres away. Above all, we must be clear. We do not and will not tolerate prejudice against anyone in our city. Let us instead stand together for peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Darby. Is that seconded?
It is, Mr. Mayor, and I'll reserve my right to speak.
Thank you. Yeah, any discussion on this amendment? Yeah, Councillor Ruther, please. Matthew.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be very brief because I think the eloquent words of so many members have shown the passion for this subject. I want to thank Councillor Darby for his eloquent words and Mr. Leader for introducing this topic and for bringing this motion. I really just wanted to make a couple of points about the amendment itself. It is, as Councillor Darby says, brought in a spirit of collaboration and listening carefully to the passionate words from many colleagues today. The ones that I've picked up on transcends party politics, and I think 3 or 4 people have said both sides. So really, I'm speaking to simply clarify that the amendment wholly supports this excellent motion. There are some sundry corrections. I couldn't stop myself finding a missing definite article. And there are important clarifications that we've proposed that the word bilateral be inserted in, I think, 3 or 4 places. And a few words really to just stress the aspect of both sides. And from the very start, listening to the chaplain earlier about oppressed or oppressed, it is about both sides and about peace. So I'm proud to support this amended motion, and I hope that every single member will show their support. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Richard. Councillor Potter, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I want to commend the courage of all those that have spoken today, and do recognise that this amendment we put in, we spent maybe 2 hours together as a group deciding how we should amend this, because it is in the spirit of being a friendly amendment, because of whichever party you are from, whichever local party you are from, there will be people of differing views on this particular conflict. I know of Liberal Democrats who disagree with the Liberal Democrat official position on ceasefire. I know some that think we don't go far enough, some that think we've gone too far. And I respect each and all of those opinions, but I am extraordinarily proud that the Lib Dems, the only party represented in this chamber, official position nationally is to recognise a ceasefire. Perhaps because we have a brilliant Palestinian heritage MP in Layla Moran, who his family is currently in Gaza City, and unfortunately one of them died not too long ago, last week, I believe. But the point of this conflict, which hurts so much for all of us, is that for every innocent that is killed, peace takes another step away. And what Hamas did and what the Israeli military is doing and the death of civilians, we will never have peace until we all recognise that that is not the way forward. Our amendment goes on to talk about Israel has the right to defend itself, which it does under international law, and as should the Palestinian peoples under a recognised two-state solution. As Councillor Rutter has said, we've amended this motion in several places to seek the word bilateral in it, because Hamas cannot be allowed to be in charge of Gaza while they repeatedly call for further and repeated October the 7th attacks. There will never be peace while they are in power. And I want the Palestinian state to have a free, fair and prosperous life. But one of the things, some of the messages come, and I just want to just mention, Councillor Brooks, I think your comments, you might want at some point to find a way of retracting some of them. You are entitled to your opinion, but to say that the Prime Minister's country isn't supporting it because he has a financial gain, unless you can back that up with fact, you might find yourself in legal trouble. So as a friend, I would suggest maybe retracting that comment. But going back to the motion, we talked, I enjoyed the bit where he said doing the right thing isn't hard over the other side. Now, we are very proud of the Lib Dem position, and part of the motion talks about the SNP and the Green Party all being in favour of the ceasefire. That's over 6 million voters at the last general election supported those parties. Councillor Whittam alluded to it. 2 people that are missing from this resolution is Keir Starmer, and the other one is Mark Hendrick. You talk about what can local people do. Our own MP called for a ceasefire, then refused to vote for it. and you want us to step up as individual councillors. I agree with that and I applaud that, and I think you've all done a remarkable job. But if you can't even get your own MP, who you guys campaign for, maybe help with re-election, select him again, if he's not willing to do it, he's one of the strongest advocates in this city. And so it's really disappointing from all sides that he was unable to vote with 56 Labour colleagues, along with 100% of Lib Dem MPs, 90% of SNP MPs, the Green Party MP, the Alliance Party, that all called for a ceasefire as the amendment to the King's speech. So that is great disappointment that I have to say that, but I think the motion was extremely well written, Councillor Brown. I think you've done yourself proud in the way you've written it, beg your pardon. I think Councillor Darby's amendment is in the right spirit and is meant in that spirit. And I hope you all support it, because I don't want to quote Councillor Afzal's what she said when she talked about abstaining, but to abstain or vote against this amendment means that you don't agree with some of those clauses that we've put in, such as Hamas being a terrorist organisation or Israel having the right to exist and have as a sovereign country. So I hope you will all support this amendment, and I hope we will all go together and support the ceasefire as part of the original motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Potter. Any more speaker? Yeah, Councillor Hansel, please.
Didn't think I was allowed to come back after John Potter.
Sorry.
So
So she's speaking on the amendments. Sorry, Councillor Potter, are you?
I just disdained. Pardon? With Nick Ballstone's going up at the weekend. That's bloody showed you, right?
Yeah, Councillor Hansel, can you sit down, please? Yeah, I was got legal advice that Councillor Brown can come back before the amendments goes to the vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, John and Neil, for the contributions. Unfortunately, we won't be supporting the Liberal Democrat amendment. Reason for that is we have made public statements based around things that are within the motion. We've actually said as a Labour group, and we said at the last full council, about condemning Hamas and the terrorist attack. We also think that within our motion, it's pretty obvious and clear that things like a two-state solution and a diplomatic process does mean that we want to have Palestine governed in a different way. So sadly, we won't be able to support this motion going forward, but we do appreciate your comments, because we do appreciate that it has been challenged very much in what we've been saying. So we're going to vote against this, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Brown. Can we have the vote on the amendments, please? can we have the vote on the amendments? All in favor? Anyone against? Any abstention? Thank you, it's carried. It's carried in favor.
Fails.
Yeah, it's amendment failed, sorry, yeah.
So we move to the the leader can speak.
So we now move to the substantial original motion, and the leader can speak on that. Councillor Brown?
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much indeed. I want to commend all the speakers on my side of the chamber. It's been an amazing amount of passion and emotion, and everyone spoke really eloquently. I don't apologise for having this extra council meeting, Mr. Mayor, because as our members on our side have said, the amount of concern that we've received as representatives in the Labour group has been something I've never seen. It's been unprecedented. The emotion out there from all communities is something that I've never seen before. So we want to move forward with our amendment, and we hope we'll have majority support and every single one will support it within this chamber. Everyone's talking about things that we all agree with. We all agree that there is injustice in the region that needs to be addressed. We all agree about the need for an immediate ceasefire. That needs to be done. We all need to move forward in terms of a solution that's based on equality and justice and diplomacy within the region. We have written to Keir Starmer privately saying that we're urging him to support a ceasefire. That is our position. We'll continue lobbying for our party to change its position. We feel that at some point that will happen, and we'll continue to do that with many others in the Labour movement to do that. I just also want to say that we talk about, as Councillor Vora says, we talk about numbers of people, but these are people who are losing their lives. These are children. These are older people. These are disabled people. These are people of all traditions in both Palestine and Israel, and especially the current loss of life in Palestine, which is 14,000, obviously. You know, it's very, very significant in terms of that region, the amount of suffering. And we've got to remember that everyone affected, children especially, they are people who could grow up, they could have a family, they could have a career, they could do things that are creative, and that isn't going to happen. So we've got to remember the human costs of this. These are individuals, these are children being affected at this scale. And understand the debate's been very emotional. We don't want to see any more victims in Israel or Palestine, and this is the what the motion's about. We want to see a sustainable, peaceful solution, and we're all united behind this in the chamber. You know, conflict, war, violence, wherever it comes from, is never a solution. We need a new way of thinking to find a peace and find a permanent solution based on examples that we've seen in the international community, and move forward for justice for everyone within Palestine and Israel. And the first step to that is to follow what the United Nations are saying and move towards a situation where we have a permanent ceasefire and then have a diplomatic process where we achieve that. So, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much for today, and thank you for chairing the meeting extremely well. And I hope everyone can support this motion. So I move it, and I hope we can have everyone in the chamber back the call for a ceasefire, and very simply a call by the City of Preston for peace, Mr. Mayor. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Now, can we now vote on this original motion? All those in favor, please show. Thank you. Anyone against? Any abstentions? Yeah, the original motion carried. Thank you very much. I thank all the members and also the members from the public and all our officers as well for their tremendous support on this very important and very critical and sensitive issue. Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you.